Ha 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 ho 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 ho. It don't shell. It don't happen. Entertainment Unlimited. Nollywood and Parade. The best of Nigerian movies. Full of action. Drama. Bitterness. Passion. Love and betrayal. Featuring the best of Nigerian actors. Mufeda Meju, Saint Obi, Clarence Shukura, John Okafor, and a host of others. Baba Soja, this no be Congo.
Love is civilian.
Amotola Angelina, what are you selling?
Everything I have on me is for sale. My love, my body, my heart, everything. Money. And you don't have money. Look at the nonsense drink you bought from.
All these and more in your living room 24/7. Don't miss your Nollywood movie every night.
Now, London is made up of over 8 million residents, and out of those 8 million, 49% are women. So join me as I find out more about fashion.
Original. Jewelry.
No outfit is complete without accessorizing it.
Shoes. Cuisine.
Health and fitness.
Sport. I think that women like to express themselves in whatever way.
Welcome to Cosmopolitan.
On this week's Shoot the Messenger, talking politics and policing. How much can Britain's finest really teach their colleagues in Africa and the Caribbean? Hello, I'm Henry Bonson and welcome to the programme. This is the show where we take a look at what's happening out there in the world of news and current affairs, from politics to policing and from sport to society. We have special guests whom you'll meet in just a moment. And we've also got you on the phones making your contributions. The number to call is 0207 501 7701. That's 0207 501 7701. Or if you're calling from outside the UK, it's +44 207 501 7701. This week, the political conference season starts with trades unionists from all over the country gathering in Manchester, northwest of England. Top of their agenda will be what to do about the cuts planned by the coalition government. That promises to dominate the Liberal Democrat, Labour and Conservative conferences, which take place over successive weeks. We'll be discussing all of that very shortly. And coming up later, our other talking point, what can the British police do for us? For years now, the Met has sent specialists all over the world to help train officers in the latest policing techniques. But how exactly do they do this? We'll be hearing all about these partnerships from a senior Ghanaian policewoman and a British superintendent who's trying to help her introduce community policing to Ghana. But now it's time to meet our first guests. They are Dawn Butler, who a year ago today became Britain's first black elected female minister. She was Minister for Youth Engagement in the Labour government, which was ousted in May. Dawn lost her Brent South seat, but she begins her fight back on this programme. We also have the journalist Lester Holloway, who was a Labour councillor in a former life, but crossed the floor, sort of, some years ago and became a Liberal Democrat. He's now a councillor in Sutton to the south of London and is pushing the issue of ethnic diversity in his party. Welcome to both of you.
Right.
History in the making, Dawn, a year ago today. How does it feel?
Actually, it's quite surreal to look back and think a year ago I made history in the history books, and I'm sort of doing a tour around the schools.
Yes.
And doing talks to, you know, the young people and talking about just what you do in life and making a difference and making history. And Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal, really.
Before anybody rings in and says, hang on a minute, what about Baroness Amos or Baroness Scotland? They were appointed to the House of Lords. They were not elected by the people.
Absolutely. I was the first black female MP ever to be a minister in the House of Commons. So I was the first black woman to stand at that dispatch box and answer questions. And can you imagine how nervous I was? Do you know what I mean? I felt like the whole of history was on my shoulder. Honestly, when I think about it, I just think I was so nervous on that very first day that I stood there and had to answer questions. And the first question, you know, I responded and I sat down and I thought, oh, that's it, it's all over. And Sadiq Khan, the MP team, was beside me and he nudged me and he said, Dawn, pay attention. There's more. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, yeah.
I'm sure Lester Holloway, who's been a political observer for many years, former Labour councillor, now Lib Dem councillor, you acknowledge that history was made a year ago.
It was certainly made a year ago, and the fact that you know, Dawn got promoted so quickly, you know, into government, I think actually is testament, you know, to Dawn. And I think that, you know, history is always being made all the time now. You know, obviously it's not so long ago that the first black MPs were elected, and then obviously, you know, you had the likes of Una King that were elected, I think, in 97. She was elected, and others elected in 2005. So we're constantly sort of breaking down those barriers, and actually, you know, it's something which you know, all parties have to really, you know, continue to raise their game.
Tremendous. OK, we'll do more politics a little bit later on because the conference season is upon us. But we'll start off with our paper review. The first story from you, Dawn, in the Mail on Sunday. Let's have a look at that.
OK, I've got, is this a story about the tax on the rich?
Can I read the headline? Lib Dems risk Tory rift with soak the rich land value tax. What's that about?
Well, it's about saying that if you've got a lot of money, big house, blah, 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 you're going to have to pay more taxes. And what they're saying is this is going to cause a big rift between the Lib Dems and the Tories. But what I find really interesting about this article is that it was actually the Labour government had three bases to get us out of this economic crisis and the deficit. And the first one was securing the economy, making sure it was stable. The second one was securing taxes, so making sure that we had fair taxes. So you tax the rich more than you tax the poor. Whereas the last budget, it was very much a regressive budget. And the comprehensive spending review will probably be quite a regressive spending review as well. And the third one was to make cuts. So I think this story is quite interested in, are they moving towards Labour's thinking to how we get ourselves out of this deficit?
And you know, when you say they, you're talking about the Lib Dem side of the coalition.
I'm thinking about the Lib Dem side of the coalition. I mean, I think, you know, this contrix government is going to come to an end at some stage.
I wasn't expecting the political heat to rise so quickly, so early in the programme.
All right. Well, I'm trying to keep it. I'm trying to keep it light, but it is very, you know, it is very serious. And I think looking at how they deal. I mean, I've got more political stuff for you. I mean, I feel that Cameron and Clegg are butchers. And I think we need surgeons, not butchers. I mean, I could go on and on.
Holding his tongue. Oh, but that was the first one.
Well, I have to say, Joe, I mean, just on this point that, you know, although Tony Blair is clearly not flavour of the month, I think one of the things that points he has raised is actually about how you actually, you know, conduct yourself in opposition. And I think this sort of, you know, knee-jerk opposition list, you know, talking about condemns and talking about butchers and talking about Brokeback Mountain and so on, actually, I think put off the electorate, because what it shows is it's not about, you know, at the moment, Labour seem to be saying that everything that the coalition are doing is wrong. That is clearly the message which is coming out of Labour at the moment.
But Lester,
and actually, you know, it is not.
Brokeback coalition came from the Tory side.
Yes, but it's actually been used. It's been used quite heavily from Labour. And actually,
do you know what?
It's not really about.
What's going to interest our viewers abroad, especially, but also here in the UK, is what it means to actually tax land. Because it's not raised very often, is it? You know, people think about income tax and other forms of taxation like capital gains tax. But if you're somebody living, I don't know, in Jamaica or Nigeria or somewhere else, you wouldn't imagine that people could actually have land here in this country and not be taxed on it. I mean, and this is something that the Liberal Democrats are trying to raise money from. Is that the idea, or that's what they're proposing?
Well, we fought the election, you know, on the idea of a mansion tax, which was actually opposed, you know, at the time by some people. But ultimately, it's about saying that, you know, if you live in a, you know, a house which is worth, you know, £2 million or over, then you need to actually pay some tax on that. Now, I think that, you know, there's underlying principles about fairness, really, which I think is the flip side of the policy about actually at the same time trying to take the lowest earning people out of the tax bracket. bracket, which is one thing that has actually happened, which you know kind of contradicts what you were saying about
there's a big division between rich and poor in many of the countries. There's a very big division between rich and poor in many of the countries.
And it hasn't changed at all.
Outside,
you know, over the decades.
Can I say?
We haven't had, you know, inequality has grown, and so this is something which, you know, is in many ways not a party political point, because
everybody
you know,
agrees
because you know the past government have failed on it, you know, previous governments have failed on this as well, and now the ball is really in the court of this government.
All right, let's go to the second story.
Let's
get to the second story.
Yes.
9/11, the 9th anniversary of it, and of course solemn ceremonies at Ground Zero in New York and also at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. President Obama attended that particular one, and a great deal of controversy over a pastor in Florida who was threatening to burn the Quran, the Muslim holy book.
Yes, that's right. This is the story that I picked out. Of course, it's
Fear and protests, Mar 9/11 anniversary.
All papers today. But essentially, there was an interesting article in the Observer which was essentially saying, you know, to Obama, you know, ignore this crazy pastor. And in many ways, it seems that you know, this stunt that this pastor in Florida has actually pulled has actually in many ways, you know, been blown out of proportion.
You don't think he was serious about it then?
Well, I don't know whether he was serious about it, but actually, you know, clearly he's self-published as somebody who really wanted to draw attention to himself. But in the wider scheme of things, you know, I understand, you know, entirely why, you know, Muslims would be completely outraged about the burning of the Quran, and you know, I completely agree with that. But the way that the media have actually treated this story, I think, has actually fueled the flames to a large extent.
They're giving him too
because
much publicity.
He's been given far too much publicity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I agree that he's just received an almighty amount of publicity, and his church is so small. Basically, the congregation feels the size of a bus, just a normal bus, not a bendy bus, just a normal bus, low-decker bus. And now he's got all this publicity. But I also think, though, it's because there was an escalation in terms of the speed in which it was growing.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's because of the internet and YouTube and Facebook. And so they had a choice to make, because what happened was that soldiers were being attacked in Afghanistan because the rumours were spreading around. So you either ignored it, but then it might have escalated and then grown out of proportion.
Although soldiers were being attacked in Afghanistan.
Or you tackle it head on and you say, well, actually, this is not what America's about. This is not what we're about. The majority of people are not about. So let's try and put a stop to it. And I think that's the reason. But I think it was a difficult decision to make, but yeah.
Absolutely, and of course one of the interesting things as well is that, you know, in the Observer, they're really talking about the reaction of Muslims in New York, actually feeling that, you know, for years they've always felt part of America, but suddenly the mood is changing. You've got the Tea Party, which you know, seems to be sort of, you know,
that's a right-wing anti-government.
It's right-wing anti-government, and although it's actually portrayed as actually being more of an anti-tax you know, party, you know, the messages and the signals that are coming out of it are extremely right-wing and, you know, extremely polarising.
And some people are saying that on a day where solemn things were taking place, as we can see on our screen right now, it was not a day for protest, it was a day for solemn commemoration. It was very, very difficult for President Obama to strike the right note, was it not, given that he is very unpopular in the polls, given that we've got the midterm elections coming up, given that there's the massive controversy over the Islamic Cultural Centre at Ground Zero.
I think extremists and fanatics of any ilk basically need to be condemned. And, you know, we need to say, actually, that is not the majority thinking. And I think today is a day for sober reflection, you know, for all those brave people that died. I mean, I was listening on the radio to, you know, a young man who didn't know whether he was in boarding school and he didn't know whether his father had died and was on the 25th floor of one of the Twin Towers. And, you know, it's just that day that we should be respecting those families.
OK, let's move to another story, this time in the Sunday Times, Dawn, and it's to do with your old manor, your old stomping ground, Brent, where you were the MP for from 2005 to 2010.
Yes. It says, Gove saves school in his deputy's backyard. And basically, it's all about one school, John Kelly. It's now an academy. And basically, a few years ago, they were supposed to, first of all, get £5 million that was promised under Labour Council to buy additional land so they can build a bigger school. Then they were promised some extra money to rebuild the school because it needs complete rebuilding. And the Lib Dem council at that stage reneged on the deal. And then they were told they might not get the money from the council. Luckily now they have got that money, but we've still got 3 other schools in Brent that has been promised building schools for the future money, and now this coalition government is saying, well, there wasn't the money there in the first place. And, you know, Lesser talks about, you know, people don't like, you know, all of this attacking for attacking sake.
We're supposed to be having a new kind of politics, aren't we?
Yeah, but come on, let's be realistic about this. You know, what we keep hearing is, well, there wasn't any money there in the first place. Now, I obtained a letter from the Permanent Secretary that said that Building Schools for the Future money was costed by the Treasury, so the money was there. Now, the question is, where's the money now? What are you doing with that money? So
basically, what you're saying is that schools are now a political football. Well, I suppose it's
absolutely.
Governments will divide on exactly how to develop schools, how much money to allocate them.
Absolutely.
People outside this country will be very surprised to hear that Britain, what, the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world, has problems funding a school building programme, when schools and education for all is meant to be one of the Millennium Development Goals that they'll be discussing in New York at the United Nations in a week or so's time.
And it's complete hypocrisy, and from this Lib Dem and Tories, complete hypocrisy. And when you talk about the gap between the rich and the poor, the Building Schools for Future programme was supposed to help 3.3 million children improve their life chances, and that's what has been put at risk by cancelling the Building Schools for Future.
It seems like we're...
Does the left wing of the Liberal Democrat Party worry that these cuts are ideologicals, i.e. we make cuts for cuts' sake, and actually areas of government spending, like schools, which should be protected, I mean, education is at the top of the agenda, is being sacrificed?
Well, I think that there was, yes, absolutely, there will be worries about this, and I think we're going to have a big debate about these issues in the party conference in Liverpool. But at the same time, I think there are two sides to this coin. One is that, you know, I was very disappointed when some schools actually lost their Building Schools for programme money in Sutton. But, you know, a huge proportion of that money, a large percentage, is actually spent on consultants. This is actually a programme which, you know, doesn't just benefit schools, but it actually benefits consultants. And actually, if you just gave that money to schools, they could actually do the whole process much more cheaply. Now, obviously, what we need to do in many ways is actually reinvent the whole process, whereby we actually empower schools, but we at the same time don't deny schools the money to rebuild, because at the end of the day, otherwise we will go back to having the crumbling schools that we had in the 80s.
Okay, crumbling schools to crumbling houses. Not enough houses being built, and immigrants from around the developing world, from Eastern Europe as well, being blamed. What's happening with house building? You've got a story there in the Sunday Times, Leicester.
Yes, I have. And this story here, I don't know if the monitors are actually...
Racist rip-off by rogue landlords. What's that about?
Well, what this is about, essentially, is the situation faced by European migrants coming to Britain to work, essentially being exploited for housing, and, you know, essentially the landlords getting as much money as possible they can out of them. But actually, I think this in many ways actually has echoes of the way in which immigrants have been treated, you know, through the decades. You know, when the first Caribbean immigrants came to Britain, you know, further waves of immigrants from around the Commonwealth. We're seeing exactly the same picture, and I think that what we need to do is to actually, although for many sort of, you know, immigrant communities and you know, descendants, we tend to sometimes, you know, actually forget about, you know, that experience. But actually, European migrants, we need to actually remember there is a sort of continuum of bad experience.
So that even though they don't have darker skin, they can still be vulnerable and exploited. We're going to stop you there for a second, Lester, because I've been inviting people to call in on +44 207 501 7701. That's +44 207 501 7701 if you're calling from outside the UK. If you're calling from here, 0207 501 7701. And we've got a caller on the line from Nigeria. Hello to you.
Danny. Hello?
Hello, you want to talk about 9/11, the anniversary. What would you like to say?
Yes. My name is Ahmed Sanihanga.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes,
do you
please
hear
make
me?
your
point. My
point.
name is Ahmed Sanihanga, calling from Kano, Nigeria.
Hello, please make your point.
Hello?
Yes, please turn down the sound on your television, please, because it's feeding back.
Okay, I have done that.
Okay, thank you. Please make your point briefly, please.
Okay. My point is that the tragedy that happens in about September 11 is known to every Muslim in the world that it's American policy or American government policy. Who did that? And about that pastor that is intending to ban the Quran, please, we have no objection. Let him go on. God is always overseeing him, and he will not let that be done. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sani from Kano, Nigeria, not quite clear what he was getting at. He seemed to be indulging in a conspiracy theory that the Americans had some involvement in 9/11. I wasn't quite clear about that, but I hear you see these things running their way around the internet, and of course, as long as there are human beings, there'll be conspiracy theories.
Absolutely, and the internet just exacerbates everything, doesn't it? It makes it so much bigger, it makes something so much viral. But I think the most important thing is that Islam isn't a violent religion. It is a peaceful...
People who are violent.
It's people who are violent. So, you know, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has, you know, one of his most famous prayers is about peace being on him, peace being on you, peace be on everybody. And I think that's, you know, that what needs to come out of this, because in order to walk in somebody else's shoes, you have to first take your own shoes off. And I think what we have to do is build an understanding, because what we don't want is more rifts and more divides, because that will just lead to further misunderstandings and probably violence, which we don't need.
Indeed, Dawn, we all have to coexist, do we not?
Absolutely.
And one of the things that you're trying to highlight in that story on housing and immigrants is that people who have an immigrant background perhaps have to think about those people who have come afterwards, because often we see in this country people of South Asian background, Indian, Pakistani and African and Caribbean, often saying, well, these Eastern Europeans are coming now, they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, which is the kind of things that were said to their parents, the people who came here in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in fact, when I was, you know, canvassing in Sutton, I actually knocked on the door of a Polish immigrant who'd been here for 10 years, and I was absolutely astounded when he was talking about all these immigrants coming to the UK, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, come on, you know. But, you know, I absolutely, you know, agree with, you know, premises of your question. I think we do need to actually, you know, I think it's a measure of society, not just how we care for the poor, but actually how we respond to immigrants, because if we actually isolate them, you know, if they have bad experience, then, you know, in many ways that's going to feed through to further generations. In many ways, you know, the country will actually be building future problems for itself.
And most of the immigrants who have come to this country since 2004, when the European Union expanded and took in much more of the Eastern European countries, they've come from the likes of Poland, Latvia, Lithuania. Most immigration is now white into this country, isn't it?
Yes. And I think that, I mean, there is obvious sort of resentments there. And, you know, people say, oh, you don't hear people speaking English anymore, blah, blah, blah. And in Brent, we're the most diverse constituency in the UK. And so, and what you have to do...
I've heard David Lammy of Tottenham say the same thing.
Oh, you'll hear quite a few MPs say the same thing, but I tell you, I'm the one that's actually got had the constituency with the most diverse constituency in the UK. But the thing is this, is that you have to build an understanding. So when your neighbour isn't like you. So when your neighbour is from a different ilk, whether your neighbour is Eastern European or African or Jamaican or Irish, and you get on with your neighbour, you realise then that if somebody confronts you and says, oh, you know, you say, well, actually, no, they're not. And that's how you break it
As
down.
Reverend Jesse Jackson often says, we need to build bridges. Build bridges.
Build
and
bridges.
If your neighbour is from Chad, like our caller on the line, how would you welcome them? Is it Keji on the line from Chad? Hello to you. Well, he was on the line. Maybe he's gone back to Chad. I don't know where he is now. OK, let's go back to our papers. Dawn, I think, cuts in the police force, and this is something that people are very worried about. They're saying it will be a Christmas for criminals here in Britain.
I mean, again, Leicester made references...
Where's the headline?
Oh, sorry. Cuts will devastate police officers warn.
Right.
And the thing is this. If you think back to the 80s, yeah, we didn't have safer neighbourhood teams, which I know you'll be discussing later on. We had fewer police, and we had fewer youth centres, and we are actually going back to the 80s. Now, the reason why there was all the investments in the schools, all the investments in the police, is because we wanted to improve society. We wanted to make sure there was less crime. Now, making these cuts where there could be a loss of up to 40,000 police on our streets, it's just not good enough. And then to use the excuse that, oh, you're always going to say no to cuts, or, you know, a lot of it's wasted, or a lot of them were filling in paperwork, you know, inside a building. People are not going to keep buying that, because this is actually affecting you when you're walking down the streets. Train stations. I fought a Safer Stations campaign because one of my constituents then got killed. You know, and now they're talking about having stations that are unstaffed. We don't want to go back to those days.
Big concern about this, Leicester, of course, and very shortly we've got the Assistant Commissioner of the Ghana Police Service, Florence Arthur. She'll be with us in the studio, and she's over here to look at how we do things here in this country. How much of a concern is that for you, that policing could be devastated by the cuts that the coalition government is going to implement?
Well, I think, the first thing is really we need a dose of reality here, because I think that sometimes, and this is a game that chancellors have long played, this is actually not part of a political thing, where they actually talk up the level of cuts in order to actually encourage departments and encourage services to come up with as many sort of efficiency savings as they possibly can. I think once we start getting stories which are actually talking about substance of cuts and actually about actual proposals that are being put forward, then I think that's when we can really start talking about whether services will actually be slashed or not. Now, clearly, at the same time, there will be cuts, I think, across the board. I mean, there would have been cuts, if Labour had got in as well. I think there's also, I think, a recognition that although nobody wants to see any cuts whatsoever anywhere, we need to deal with a situation where if we hadn't, if we're not tackling the deficit, we're going to end up paying, interest, which is equivalent to about, 70 billion a year. We just can't do that. So we do need to actually try and make, cuts, but cuts which are not really affecting frontline services. Now, obviously, police are absolutely crucial, but at the same time, I don't think anybody can tell you that, the police can't be made more efficient, and that we can't actually deal with some of the red tape that's actually keeping on the desks for sometimes 80% of their time.
All right, OK. No, I know you want to come back in there. We'll talk about policing in more detail a little bit later on, Dawn, with our other guests. Leadership contest in the Labour Party, it's hotting up, getting to its climax, and the Sunday Times, Leicester, has covered this, and you've got that in front of you there.
Yes,
and the front runners are two brothers called Miliband. David Miliband, the heir apparent to Tony Blair, they say, and Ed Miliband, his younger brother. Now, what about this story? Shock poll gives lead to Ed Miliband.
Well, I thought this was fascinating because Ed Miliband seems to have been making a lot of running, as the polls, for the Labour, leadership actually close, and it seems to me that the way in which Ed Miliband has been portrayed, in some right-wing media, has actually probably assisted him, because he's been called, Red Ed, and so on. But actually,
and for people who don't know David and Ed Miliband, Ed is the one who's supposed to be a bit more left-wing.
He's supposed to be a bit more left-wing, but
yes.
then it might be a case of the the right and the left buttock. Essentially they're still part of the same anatomy. But essentially, Ed Miliband, I think, actually, it seems to me appeals to Labour because he's actually speaking more to Labour values. Now, obviously, Dawn might disagree, because I understand you're backing David Miliband, but I think it will definitely go to the wire, and it will be, in many ways, actually a shock to certainly the print, and the media establishment if Ed Miliband was to win.
Right, and Dawn, I mean, is the term left-wing or red still a dirty word in the Labour Party, or has it now been reclaimed? Because Ed Miliband says, I'm proud to call myself a socialist.
Yeah, I think they all did. All 5 candidates said they're proud to be socialists, and then explained, what socialism meant to them. I don't think it's a dirty word at all. I do think, though, it's outdated. I think left-wing, right-wing, I think it's outdated.
Why is it outdated?
Because I think what we need to do is just be sensible Labour, and be a progressive Labour. I think we are the only progressive party now. There are no other progressive parties. When you think about...
When people say progressive, because I hear lots and lots of... Even David Cameron, the Prime Minister, talked about progressive conservatism. I'm never really sure, and I guess a lot of our audience, people watching at home, aren't quite sure what people mean by progressive, because progressive surely is just somebody who wants to move on.
Yeah, and it means fairness. It means for me, being a progressive party is also, to me, means a socialist party, and it means moving fairly forward, and that's what that means to me. And I think that's what we need to be as a party, as a Labour Party. And all the candidates would make good leaders. They all do. But Leicester's right. I am supporting David Miliband, and the reason why I'm supporting David over Ed is not solely because of policies, because actually I don't actually think there's a lot of policy difference between them both. Yeah. But it's actually because I want David to take the fight to Cameron, and I can see David taking that fight to Cameron and winning. And regardless if we all agree that there needs to be cuts, we are in our economic situation is dire, even though in the second quarter it grew by 1.1%. Yeah. So what we need to do, we do need to grow our economy, and we do need to make cuts. But Henry, it's how you do it and the way that you do it that makes a difference.
And of course, that's something that you're going to be discussing at the Lib Dem conference next week, aren't you?
Absolutely. And just as an aside, you know, it's quite ironic actually for me as a Liberal Democrat member that because I'm a member of a union, I've actually, you know, got a vote in the Labour leadership contest, which I think is, you know, quite amazing, really.
Who are you voting for, Lester?
I voted for Ed Miliband.
For Ed Miliband. That's because you're kind of more left-wing than Dawn. Is that right?
You can't be a Lib Dem and be left-wing anymore. That doesn't work.
You're going to be leaving us very shortly indeed. Yes. But looking ahead to the party conference in Liverpool, it's going to be a very, very hot one, isn't it? The grassroots are steaming. They're going to try and hold the leadership, which forged this alliance with the Conservatives and made this Lib Dem Conservative government. They're going to hold them to account, aren't they, on a number of issues?
Well, they should be holding them to account because at the end of the day, the party has its own identity, it has its own values, and, you know, we need to keep pushing to make sure those are actually reflected in government. So at the moment, we've got MPs like Bob Russell and so on that are, you know, continuing to actually speak out against some coalition policies. So, you know, they will clearly be, you know, in an interesting conference in that sense. But also, at the same time, I've actually got a motion which I'm sort of pushing as part of the ethnic minority Liberal Democrats for positive action measures. Because
yes, because the Lib Dems out of the major parties don't have any MPs from African, Caribbean or Asian backgrounds, which is a shock, isn't it, in 2010?
Well, it's a shock that we haven't made progress, and I think that part of the reason, I think there are actually some different dynamics to other parties as to why we haven't made progress, and I think part of it is because actually there's an assumption that amongst some members that actually because, you know, they believe in equality, that automatically will happen. I don't think that is necessarily the case. You actually have to
from Labour and Conservative is that you have to use instruments to make it happen.
Well, I think it's always fought for. I mean, if you look, for example, at the Labour Party, sorry to cut your word, Dawn, but actually the battle, you know, for the black sections was, you know, extremely fraught in many respects. But because that battle was actually fought, the breakthrough was made, and I think it's no different in the Liberal Democrat. We've got a lot more catching up to do.
Yeah, but I also think that if you truly believe in equality, it would make a difference. And I don't think that, I think the rhetoric...
You're implying, though, that Lib Dems don't truly believe in equality?
I think the rhetoric to what they say is different from what they do. And I think that's a big sticking point. But I am really pleased that you're putting that motion together, because I think the representation in all parties of differences is absolutely needed in Parliament. So I'm really, really pleased that you're putting that
There we have it, the new politics, finally. Half an hour into the programme. Thank you very much. After all that bickering and yaboo, thank you very much to Lester Holloway. Dawn is going to stay with us. Now, here in Britain, we've often repeated the mantra, policing by consent, i.e. the police can only do their job with the trust and cooperation of we the people. It's the only way a nation of 62 million people can be kept in order by a mere 170,000 police officers. Over the years, that notion has been put to the test by various incidents in which officers have abused their powers. But by and large, that reputation as having perhaps the best police service in the world has largely survived. That's why from Jamaica to Nigeria, British officers are consulted for their expertise, as this report now shows.
Security and justice are essential for growth and development. In many countries, poor people tend to be more exposed to crime of opportunity and to suffer more from restrictions of movements due to the fear of crime. Victoria Timothy sells grain at a local market in Gwagwalada, central Nigeria. Because of crime, she battles to make a living.
Yes, there are some problems because on market day you find some people shouting thief, they steal their money all the time. So we find those problems.
But creating a safe and secure environment is challenging. Nigeria is a vast and complex country. There is a police force of over 370,000 officers. But public perception of the police is generally negative, with perceptions of corruption, brutality, and lack of professionalism.
Those old people who are in the office, all those policemen with the old mentality, I mean, they will arrest you, brutal you, and before they get to know, they will say sorry, and that sort of thing.
Now there is a change. The Nigerian police are determined to work with communities to ensure a crime-free society. The United Kingdom's Department for International Development, through the Security, Justice and Growth Program, has been supporting the police in this community partnership initiative.
The project went into areas of sensitization, areas of Saturday is my little boy's 4th birthday, but I won't be there.
Do you want to? Do you want to?
As we've got a really crazy full-on schedule with training, I wondered if I could bring him to one of our training sessions.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.